Hello, everybody, and welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. Today's video is an excerpt from my presentation I did in Sydney, Australia, a few weeks ago. And the context of it is the idea of how do governments solve affordability crises. There are really only three ways that they generally can do this: is either artificially supporting demand. It is through usually some sort of subsidy or stimulus. The second way is to artificially cut demand by banning certain parties in the economy from purchasing a certain good or service. Or the third one is to actually attack the problem on the supply side. There are pros and cons to each, and there are political consequences. If you like this kind of thing and want to see me speak in person, I recommend showing up to one of my other events on the tour. We are still going across the United States, and I look forward to meeting you guys all in person.
Like, if you're a government in the world. And I never really hear people talk about this because it's probably politically not acceptable to talk about this. But the first way you can do it is demand stimulus, which is the most popular way. So you make things more affordable by having the government help you afford it. Usually that means cutting interest rates. It's like to buy a property. So like if the mortgage payment, if the interest rates are at 6% is, and I'm just throwing out random numbers, it's not going to probably calculate cleanly. If the 6%, your mortgage payment is $5,000 a month. Oh, you cut the rate to 4%, and now your mortgage payment is $3,000 a month. The house hasn't gone down in price. It's not actually more affordable. It's just your payment is lower because of a temporary interest rate cut. And that is an example of demand or subsidies. So say, for example, you get a tax credit if you buy electric cars. You got a $7,500 tax credit if you bought an electric car. So it made the car more affordable, but that's because the government paid the car dealer a $7,500 kickback. Once the subsidy goes away, it goes right back up or higher. Or if the subsidy doesn't go away, you increase the demand and the supply is the same, and therefore now things are more expensive. Like that's the example. Like you lower interest rates, the housing prices go up because people will now, just instead of buying that same house at $5,000 a month, mortgage payment $4,000, they'll just pay a higher price until they're paying $5,000 a month again at the lower interest rate. And as you can see, this doesn't really work. It just causes inflation. The second way you can address affordability is by forcing cuts in demand. You can do this through outlawing certain purchases or not allowing certain people to buy things, or by reducing the population, but I think through immigration policy. But generally the most common way is to just ban certain people from buying stuff. Example, which I think is a bad idea from President Trump, is his proposal to not allow financial institutions to buy single family homes. And so by doing that, they're like, hey, look, there's less money going to be chasing that good and service if you ban institutional investors. But that's not really solves the problem. You need to make it so it's not attractive for institutional investors to buy real estate. And the way to do that would be to have interest rates in the bond market be high enough so that institutional investors don't want to go through the hassle of being a landlord. They can just collect their coupons in the bond market. And that's why I was never really worried about BlackRock owning all of the houses in America, because that was a product of ZIRP. And once interest rates went back up, they start either not buying or selling those properties. So, hey, look, for a lot less effort and a lot less hassle, I can get a higher or equal yield in the bond market. And the third way, which is the correct way to do it, is the supply side. And that is you have policies that increase supply, or even better, just prevent supply from artificially being lowered due to government intervention. So example of this, if you go back to the real estate example, would be to get rid of zoning laws or allow developers to build what they want and not have the government get in their way with a bunch of environmental approvals or regulatory screens or things like that. This would actually solve the problem in the long run, but it's politically unpopular because solving the problem with an affordability crisis usually means there's losers about it. Like demand, I think also artificially removing the demand, like by raising interest rates, would also solve the problem in terms of affordability. But they don't actually want to solve the problem with affordability crisis. Is that when Trump was asked by the press about does he care about affordability of housing? He's yes, but don't you realize that affordability means that you need to have housing prices come down? No, I want all of my homeowner voters to have their housing prices keep going up and be rich off their houses. You can't really have it both ways. Housing is an investment that keeps going up and have affordability. Unless if we're gonna change our society, make it normal for multi-generational households or to live in I don't think either of those are culturally acceptable to most Western countries. And so you have to, in order to solve the affordability problem, there'll be clear losers. Housing obviously is existing homeowners. Like if you want housing to be more affordable, you need actual housing prices to go down. And whether that's restricting demand through higher interest rates or getting rid of stimulative policies that make people be able to afford more house than they can normally would on their own income, or banning foreigners from buying it, that's another way to artificially reduce demand. Like all of those things would have the consequences of lowering prices, but in a country like America, that 60% of the population is homeowners, you're gonna have a lot of angry voters. Be like, hey, look, why are you trying to tank my housing price? I was relying on that for my retirement because a lot of boomers didn't save for retirement. They were, especially in places like California and New York, were relying on selling a house and moving to Arizona or Florida or renting an apartment off the proceeds of it. But no, you can't, and that's kind of the problem. Is the reason why it's so expensive is because you hire a bunch of admins who make more than $100,000 a year doing bureaucratic stuff behind the scenes. These aren't teachers or research professors. They're people who run the school behind the scenes and do a lot of the run the departments. And same with healthcare. You have a lot of admins and bureaucrats in the hospital system, the insurance industry, that do a lot of things that aren't primary caregiving. The other country that doesn't have socialized medicine has their costs 40% lower than America. Why? Because their headcount is significantly lower than the US. And the problem is, if you did want to make these affordable, the solution is firing all these people. But then you basically just gutted your entire middle class, or a large chunk of it. So what do you want? Do you want affordability and do you want a competitive society? Or do you want to protect vested existed interests? Do you want to protect particularly the middle class in these more bureaucratic professions or retirees and protect their retirement? And that's why this affordability crisis is very difficult to solve, because the only really solution is to bring pain on certain special interests that will do whatever it can to protect it. So when everybody tries to do something about it, they'll default to the demand option, even though it creates a worse problem in the long run. It eventually gets solved by a financial bust because economic gravity eventually breaks the inflation. Or you have the central bank respond like what Volcker did in the 80s and raise interest rates to the point where it breaks and you create the unemployment and all the economic disruption that resets the system. And that's where I do give credit to Jerome Powell. He did raise rates when things looked like they were about to get out of control. And there were some consequences. The housing market peaked. It's been flat since 2021. It's down in real terms in the US since that point. Education spending versus inflation has declined every year since the pandemic as well. Healthcare is still going up, but I think that's more demographically driven to a certain degree. But I think the worst of the affordability crisis might be behind us, but it's going to be very gradual and not be fixed fast enough to save an election cycle.